In the year 2035, a team of astronauts travels to Mars aboard the spacecraft Hermes. Their mission is planned to last 31 Martian days, called sols. On Sol 18, the crew is exploring an area known as Acidalia planitia. While working outside, the team's botanist, Mark, collects soil samples to study. Suddenly, Beth, the systems officer, receives a warning on her computer. A huge dust storm is heading straight toward them. She quickly alerts the crew and tells everyone to return to their base, called the habitat, or HAB, as the sky begins to grow dark. Mark and Alex, the chemist, suggest staying where they are and waiting out the storm. However, the commander, Melissa, believes the storm will be far too strong. She orders everyone to prepare for an emergency evacuation. After putting on their space suits, the crew opens the main door of the HAB. Instantly, powerful winds and flying dust slam into them. Fighting the storm, they struggle toward the Mars Ascent Vehicle, MAV, which they need to leave the planet. Mark stays behind for a moment to secure the HAB door. Time is running out because the strong winds could knock the MAV over. Mark suggests using cables and the rover to stabilize it. Suddenly, a communications dish breaks loose and flies through the air. The crew ducks to avoid it, but Mark is hit hard and thrown into the storm. His suit is damaged, and the crew's sensors show that his life signs have disappeared. Commander Melissa searches for him, but the storm is too strong. Chris, the medical officer, explains that a torn suit in these conditions would mean certain death. Heartbroken, Melissa orders the launch. The crew leaves Mars, believing Mark has died. Back on Earth, NASA Administrator Teddy holds a press conference and announces that the Mars mission is returning without one of its crew members. However, back on Mars, the storm eventually passes. Mark regains consciousness. His suit warns him that his oxygen is dangerously low. A piece of antenna debris is stuck in his body. While it pierced his suit, it also sealed the hole just enough to keep him alive. Mark cuts the wire, makes his way back to the HAB, and carefully removes the metal from his body. He patches his suit and survives. Mark logs into the HAB's computer and begins recording a video diary. He explains his situation in case he does not live. The communication system is destroyed, so he cannot contact Earth. The next Mars mission is not scheduled for another 4 years, and Mark doubts he can survive that long. After resting, Mark becomes bored and starts cleaning and organizing the HAB. He packs away his crewmates' belongings and looks at their photos. This gives him strength. He decides that he will not die on Mars. The next day, Mark checks the food supply. He finds potatoes saved for Thanksgiving, and this gives him an idea. Using his knowledge of plants, he decides to grow food on Mars. He uses Martian soil and processed human waste as fertilizer. To water the crops, he creates a system that turns leftover rocket fuel into water. His first attempt causes a fire, but he learns from his mistake and tries again safely. This time it works. Over many days, Mark follows a strict routine. He records daily video logs, takes care of his potato plants, and cleans the solar panels so he has power. By Sol 54, he is excited to see the plants begin to grow. Meanwhile, on Earth, Vincent, the head of Mars operations, suggests launching another mission much sooner than planned. Teddy is unsure, worrying that the mission might only recover Mark's body. Vincent argues that even that would be meaningful for Mark's family. Later, a technician at NASA scans Mars using satellite images and notices changes near the HAB. She alerts NASA leadership. Teddy, Vincent, and Annie, the communications director, rush to see the images. They realize something incredible. Mark is alive. They debate how to tell the public and worry about Mark's mental health and limited supplies. Teddy announces at a press event that Mark is alive but avoids giving details. The Hermes crew, still traveling home, does not yet know the truth. By Sol 70, Mark begins planning how to survive long-term. He calculates that the next mission will land over 3,200 kilometers away. To reach it, he will need to travel for about 50 sols in a small rover with limited life support. His biggest challenge is mobility, since the rover can only travel 35 kilometers per charge. Mark begins planning how to modify the rover using spare parts, determined to find a way to survive and make it home. After the earlier storm destroyed one of the rovers, Mark focuses on improving the one that still works. During a night test drive, he manages to greatly extend the rover's battery life. However, he quickly learns how extremely cold Mars becomes at night. Using the rover's heater would drain too much power and could leave him stranded. Mark realizes his best option is to use the RTG, radioisotope thermoelectric generator, a device powered by plutonium that was left behind from the mission. It provides steady heat and electricity, but is very dangerous to handle. Working carefully, Mark digs it up, transports it safely, and installs it in the rover. The RTG gives the rover constant warmth and power, solving a major problem. Back on Earth, Vincent speaks at a press conference about strange movements NASA has seen in satellite images. He guesses that Mark may be trying to reach a future landing site. He says that if NASA could talk to Mark, they would tell him to stay where he is. Teddy is angry that Vincent made these guesses public, since a rescue plan is not yet confirmed. Still, Teddy orders engineers to prepare a supply mission. When told it would take 9 months, he demands it be done in 3 months, even if it means working nonstop. Flight director Mitch urges Teddy to tell the Hermes crew that Mark is alive, but Teddy refuses. He wants to wait until a rescue is more certain. By Sol 79, Mark successfully harvests his first potato crop. He saves the larger potatoes for food and replants the smaller ones. While studying maps, he thinks about how to communicate with Earth again. He suddenly has an idea and drives the rover in a direction that confuses NASA staff watching from Earth. Vincent checks old satellite maps and realizes where Mark is going, an old Mars probe from 1997 called Pathfinder. Mark digs it out of the sand and brings it back to the HAB. He begins repairing it and trying to bring it back online. At the same time, NASA engineers build a copy of the Pathfinder system on Earth so they can match it. Eventually, the systems connect and images from Mars start coming in. Mark sets up signs in front of the camera. One asks, "Are you seeing this?" 2 others say yes and a no. When NASA moves the camera to point at yes, Mark celebrates. He finally knows he is not alone anymore. Communicating is still very difficult. Mark finds Beth's laptop and discovers a chart of letter and number codes. Using markers and signs, he creates a simple way to spell messages. NASA copies the setup on Earth, and two-way communication becomes possible. Mark explains how he survived and makes it clear that none of it was his crew's fault. NASA then sends him instructions to modify the rover so it can send signals through Pathfinder. Mark follows the steps carefully and succeeds. Vincent sends Mark a message, telling him that people all over the world are cheering for him and that a resupply mission is being planned. When Mark asks about the Hermes crew, Vincent explains they still don't know he is alive. Mission Control wants them focused on getting home. Angry and frustrated, Mark types several messages full of swear words, accidentally sending them during a public broadcast. To calm the situation, Teddy tells officials that Mark's behavior is due to stress and isolation. Meanwhile, Mitch secretly breaks protocol and sends a message to the Hermes crew. After 4 months in space, they receive a shocking video. Mark is alive. The crew is overwhelmed with emotion and guilt for leaving him behind. By Sol 128, Mark records that NASA now asks for constant updates, even about small things like farming. He feels annoyed and micromanaged. He also receives many messages, including one from the president and one from his old university. They joke that by growing food on Mars, Mark has technically become the first human colonist. Mark proudly accepts the title and jokingly declares himself Mars' first colonist. Later, when NASA asks him to pose for a serious photo for public relations, Mark instead jokes around in front of the camera, much to the frustration of Annie, NASA's media director. The director is annoyed by Mark's casual attitude in his messages, but Teddy tells her to post them anyway. NASA also announces that a supply capsule will be launched and should arrive in about 9 months. Even though Mark's food can last for now, Teddy worries that many things could still go wrong. One evening, after doing repairs outside, Mark re-enters the HAB when a sudden pressure failure happens. The airlock explodes and is blown far away across the Martian surface. Mark survives, but his suit is damaged and oxygen starts leaking. Thinking fast, he uses adhesive tape to seal the cracks and barely saves himself. When Mark gets back inside the HAB, he is devastated. The explosion has destroyed all of his crops. Angry and overwhelmed, he grabs what supplies he can and sleeps in the rover that night. He later sends a message to NASA. Vincent tells the team that Mark now has about 200 days of food left. Teddy orders everyone to rush work on the supply probe. NASA finally connects Mark's communication system to the Hermes, allowing him to talk directly with his crewmates again. The next day, Mark cleans out the destroyed greenhouse and seals the damaged area. That night, he carefully rations his remaining potatoes while another storm howls outside, increasing his stress. Back on Earth, an orbital specialist named Rich studies the probe's path. While joking about the poor alignment between Earth and Mars, he suddenly gets a bold new idea. Meanwhile, Teddy looks for ways to speed things up by bending the rules. By day 154, Mark is barely eating and even mixes food with medicine to make it last longer. Nearly a month later, the supply probe is ready. NASA gathers to watch the launch. At first, everything looks good, but then something goes wrong. The probe veers off course and explodes. Mission control is silent. Vincent must tell Mark the bad news on day 186. Mark responds with a message to Commander Melissa, asking her to visit his parents when she returns to Earth. He wants them to know he loves them and that his work on Mars mattered. Meanwhile, officials at China's space agency see Teddy admit on TV that NASA skipped safety checks. They realize their powerful rocket could help, but only in secret. They contact Teddy, and he agrees. NASA now races to build a new probe in just 28 days. Rich presents a daring plan to Teddy, Annie, and Vincent using an office demo. Instead of sending supplies directly to Mars, he suggests sending them to Hermes. The crew would grab the cargo, swing around Earth, and head back to Mars to rescue Mark. The problem? This would add 500 days to the mission. Teddy refuses to ask the crew, fearing the risk. But aboard Hermes, Beth discovers the secret plan and tells the others. The crew meets, knowing they could face punishment and danger, but they vote unanimously to save Mark. When Hermes changes course, Teddy is forced to go public with the new plan. He also confronts Mitch, knowing he leaked the idea, and tells him he will have to resign after the mission. By day 219, Mark begins modifying the rover to survive a long journey to a distant crater where another MAV is located. NASA runs constant simulations to guide him, while Chinese scientists arrive to help with the new booster, working together under intense pressure to save Mark's life. Work on the rescue is sometimes slowed by language and cultural differences between the US and Chinese teams. Meanwhile, the crew aboard Hermes contacts their families to share the emotional news that they will not be returning to Earth for another 500 days. Mark finally finishes modifying the rover and takes it on a test drive to make sure everything works. The joint US-China booster is tested successfully, and the new supply probe launches without problems. Hermes intercepts the cargo pod near Earth and attaches it to the ship. After another 7 months, Mark prepares to leave the HAB forever. He records one last video log, shuts down the habitat systems, and writes Sol 461 on the wall with his signature. He then climbs into the rover and begins the long journey. Along the way, he must stop often to recharge the rover using solar panels he brought with him. During these breaks, Mark looks at the Martian landscape and reminds himself that he is the first human to walk in many of these places. He also takes short naps while waiting. On Sol 517, Mitch and the engineering team discover a serious problem. Hermes cannot enter Mars orbit and still have enough fuel to return home. The Mars Ascent Vehicle, MAV, can only reach a low orbit, so Mark will need much higher speed to escape Mars gravity. To make this possible, the MAV must lose 50 kilograms of weight. Mitch suggests removing everything not essential: seats, controls, and even parts of the life support system. Mark will rely only on his suit for oxygen, and the Hermes crew will control the launch remotely with no backup communication. To save even more weight, they remove the front airlock and windows and replace the top with a thin canvas cover. It is extremely dangerous, but there is no other option. When Mark receives the plan, his reaction is an angry swear word. By Sol 538, Mark reaches the crater and records another log, complaining about how crazy the plan is. Still, he admits it would be exciting to become the fastest human ever in space. He begins stripping the MAV down to its bare essentials. By Sol 560, Commander Melissa reviews the rescue plan and assigns roles to the Hermes crew. They are even prepared to leave the ship if needed. The next day, Mark packs his last food and leaves a note in the rover for any future explorer, thanking it for keeping him alive. Back on Earth, huge crowds gather outside NASA centers and around the world to watch the rescue. Mark shaves, cuts his hair, puts on his suit, and boards the MAV. Now close enough, he can finally speak to the crew by voice. Emotional, he thanks them for coming back for him. Melissa starts the countdown, and the MAV launches successfully. But minutes later, the canvas tears away, causing pressure loss. Mark passes out. Hermes shuts off the booster remotely, but the MAV runs out of fuel too early. Hermes could use reserve thrusters, but that would make the speed too high for a safe rescue. Mark wakes up bruised and jokes that he might have broken ribs. Hearing the situation, he suggests a desperate idea, puncturing a suit and using escaping air to push himself forward. This gives Melissa a better idea. They will blow an airlock to create thrust. Alex builds a small bomb using ship supplies. Chris places it on the airlock and moves to safety. The explosion gives Hermes the push it needs, but there is still a gap. Melissa suits up and goes outside. As Mark launches himself, he spins wildly but manages to stabilize. As he flies past Melissa, their hands miss, but Mark grabs a tether rope. Melissa pulls him in. The crew brings them safely back into Hermes. The rescue is successful. Celebrations break out across Earth. After returning home and recovering, Mark becomes an instructor, teaching astronauts how to survive extreme conditions. 3 years later, a new Mars mission launches, this time using everything learned from Mark's incredible journey.